Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're back for part 2 of the discussion of the defense in that game against the Texans in the divisional round. Great game. Lots of fun to talk about. And what could make it better? Having Michael Crawford as the guest. Michael, how are you doing again?
Ken, I'm doing great. It's been a lot of fun to get back together and talk football. And what a time to talk it right now, coming off the game that the Ravens had against the Texans. I mean, I'm obviously not, like a player or anything like that, but the excitement that those guys were feeling, I felt the same kind of excitement. I was like, oh, it's like a relief, kind of thing in a way, but also that anticipation of you're 2 games away. You know what I mean? So it's well, 1 game away if you can win the AFC Championship game. So it's very exciting.
Yeah. And to be now poised for the AFC Championship to be played here, to have all this garbage about the Arrowhead Invitational ended now, suspended indefinitely is the way I'm saying
it. Certainly won't be happening this year.
All right. Well, the second part of this show, we talked about a lot of things in the first show. People, please go back and download that if you haven't already. Lots of great stuff about the pass rush, about, a team that didn't get any sacks or turnovers. As Michael pointed out, it still had a great impact on this football game. That the pressure they had great impact. And I think we saw that. The Ravens did not overreact, was one of the points Michael made. They played a very limited set of packages. They didn't do a lot in terms of pressure systems that were the elements of deception that was exceptionally high, and certainly not in terms of numbers. So we saw a lot of the same out of McDonald. They won snap count 67-47. This was a case where I'm really of the opinion that it's never bad to win 67-47. It's probably a very, very good thing for your defense. We've heard otherwise from other people. So Michael and I debated that a little bit. Lots of other feel-good things about narratives ending and whatnot, and I think make that pod a worthwhile thing. But always a discussion with Michael Crawford is fun from this chair, and I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I do. But Michael, why don't you start us off in part 2 and take us through who's the player you'd like to talk about first?
Well, we kind of mentioned him in part 1, but I'll start with Justin Madubuike. I thought that he was very effective in pass rush. I mean, whether it was one-on-one rushes where it's just him going against a guard, whether it's working in combination with another player on a pick stunt or a game, whether it was in the run game. It kind of goes back to what you were just saying. I just kind of put this together in my head. I was like, man, I wonder. So very limited, right? You just talked about in terms of the number of packages that they played. And I just wondered, sometimes when you're in these really big games, obviously there's pressure. Players will always say, well, there's always pressure. It's no different. But everybody knows it's different. Everybody knows it's different, right? Because you lose and your season's over. So I wonder if there's this sort of thought from a coaching philosophy, like, look, we don't need to add any additional junk to all that stuff that these guys are already going through. So let's try to simplify as much as we can. Let's put together a good plan, but let's try to simplify as much as we can, because we just want guys to play fast. Just play fast. We don't want guys out there hesitating, unsure of themselves, not confident in something because it's not something they've done a lot. Let's just play the hits, and just let guys play fast. So I say all of that to get back to Madubuike. He's just getting off the ball. Okay. He's get off on some of these plays. He's resetting the line of scrimmage. He's a yard and a half into the backfield on some of these things. And that's like what he does best, right? His athleticism, his quickness, his power. Just go and just run through somebody's chest, okay? Or work your move and get on an edge and beat him that, whatever way you deem best to bet a guy, depending on how he's setting you. And it's like he just embraced all of that. Like they just turned him loose and just said, hey, we're not going to, complicate this. Go be who you are and what you've done best all season. And it showed through in this game, in my opinion.
Great game from Madubuike, one of his best of the entire season. I think you're right on the money with that comment. And I think one of the things to let Madubuike be Madubuike, which is a great penetrator, a great first step between two players, all the things that Justin Madubuike did. We talked a little about in the first episode, so I don't want to do it again, about him being a great underneath player on stunts. So he's the guy who sets the pick often, and he's often the guy who's first to get off that pick as soon as as one guy has to depart from that blocking arrangement, and then he's given a very advantaged situation. Justin also had a great game against the run, and in particular, he had a great game against Mason, and he had a great game against Scruggs, and they tried to get him as many one-on-one looks as they could in this game. But I don't have a single note where he's blocked by Dieter. That's not true. He's the underneath on a stunt, and he bowled both Mason and Dieter on one play. It's the last note in my article here, actually. He did a fantastic job, obviously, on guards in this game on both sides, and just absurdly effective. I have him for 5 pressures. I know PFF has him for a couple more because there's some continuation pressures in there where he chased Stroud down, which, by the way, terrifically important for the Ravens defense in this game. But a great game for Madubuike, I would agree. And I think he helped make a lot of the other players better. And I think a lot of the other players made him better, including Pierce, who's not on the field as much with him anymore. And now the pairing we're seeing, by the way, Pierce and Madubuike, they're playing basically the same snaps the first half of the year. But now it's Jones and Madubuike who are the A team for passing downs.
Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't obviously chart it in the way that you did, so you have the numbers, but you're just watching it and just visually, you see that Michael Pierce is not out there with Madubuike as much as you maybe have been accustomed to seeing him out there, and a little bit of a larger role for Travis Jones, and so there might. I don't know if it'll come up or not. I think I saw somebody submitted a question along those lines, so I won't sort of dive into my thoughts about that, about why more of Jones now and less of Pierce. So whether we get to it or not, I don't know, but I'll hold off just in case we do get to it on what some of the reasons for that could be.
Oh, we got a great set of questions out here. Look at this.
Yeah, there's a bunch of.
Let's go. This is from A Bits. At MD Bitzel, do you see the snap count continuing in Travis Jones' favor in place of in over Pierce in the playoffs, or was it just more of a one-off for this particular game? No, it's been going on for half a season now. They've really gone to more and more of Jones. Pierce and Madubuike, I just looked on my charts here. They played 10 snaps together in this game, and Jones and Madubuike, 3, 4, 5, 8, 15. 16, 17, 18, looks like they put 23 together. So Jones and Madubuike are now the A pairing on passing downs. And that's mostly a function of how dominant Travis Jones has been in terms of what he's been doing as a pass rusher. We talked about this a little bit on the first show, but Pearson and Madubuike had a great thing going on early in the year. I think they're still fine at it in terms of being a good stunt tandem. I think Jones gives them a lot of that too. And they are both really, Jones coming out of the draft, really penetrating linemen who gives you a lot of the same things that Madubuike gives you. In fact, it's not a 1-for-1 matchup, but it wouldn't be shocking. They've re-signed Pierce. If Jones takes over a lot of Madubuike's role next year, if he's not here.
Yeah. He just causes problems, and he causes them extremely quickly because of that first step quickness, because of that ability to kind of reset the line of scrimmage and to do it with power. I mean, he is a powerful young person. And so he's worked on this sort of Reggie White hump move this year where you kind of get a guy to, open up and you get under his armpit and then you just sling him over because his momentum is already, kind of on his outside leg or whatever. And you see it, like there's flashes every game. There'll be a couple of flashes every game where he just kind of does something and you're like, you're not supposed to be able to move an NFL offensive lineman like that. So I think you're right. That combination of those two, you kind of can understand why, maybe they want to have them on the field a little bit more together. But then also, if, Madubuike is not here next year, you have a guy who you feel like can kind of move into that role a little bit and give you some of that. Madubuike is an interesting guy because he's kind of like that old school. It's weird. I say old school because sort of your undersized, quote unquote, undersized defensive tackle. It's more like athleticism and that kind of thing. Old school in the system that I'm thinking of. It was the old Monty Kiffin, think Tampa Bay Buccaneers Super Bowl defense, that under tackle, right? The Warren Sapp guy, right? Yep. A little bit under, but super quick, very athletic, still has good power. your John Randalls, all of those the guys in that mode. I'm not saying he's those players, but on that spectrum of play style and sort of body type, he sort of fits into that. Whereas in the past, the Ravens have had like behemoths, like pairs of behemoths in there together. So he's a little bit unique in that way. But man, has he been good this year? I mean, holy moly.
They've been off and on. They've had great three techs and some other guys who are just less athletic at the position, and they've lived with it. But they certainly had Syracuse and Adams at the same time. Adams a much more impactful athlete than people probably give him credit for. I mean, people think of him as being a big fat guy who kept people away from Ray Lewis. Well, that wasn't at all. Adams, who had a thunderous first step, and he would create this enormous problem in terms of how you got him blocked, make it very difficult for players to get up to level 2, a guard or a center, to try and take care of Ray Lewis in that era. But they've had some good players. We mentioned some of them on the first show, so let's not go back and recover that same ground when I got you here for another hour or so. I'm gonna go ahead and name the next player. Yeah. And even though we've talked some about Travis Jones, so I'll leave him alone. And I'll go to Arthur Mollett, who had a terrific game, I thought. Made contributions, certainly in the passing game, coming downhill and making tackles, which was very valuable. He made incredible contributions as a pass rusher, including what really was the Ravens' only sack. They had an intentional grounding call that Stroud was flagged for that should have been a sack. By the way, why don't they just credit a sack for those? Wouldn't that be a reasonable choice?
It only makes sense.
Okay. But anyway, now we got to talk about it, and we got to put on 1 or 2 or 3 asterisks for players who draw more than one of those in a year. But effectively, a very good pass rush play there. He had another quarterback hit late, and I believe he had one other pressure. So a hell of a game from Mollett in terms of getting out of the quarterback. And the key thing was the Texans were not trying to block him. They were allowing him to come unblocked off the edge every single play. They had no particular answer for it. And I don't know where that has to come from, whether it has to come from running back or whether the tackle is supposed to adjust to get out to this slot corner who's blitzing. But whatever the cause was of them not picking up on a play-by-play basis, they were not addressing that situation.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up too, because that sort of, it goes by a bunch of different names: nickel fire, nickel, football terminology. People are going to call it all different things, but that sort of basic nickel off the edge pressure been around forever. I mean, this is not a new thing, but you see it. Certainly one of the favorites, I think, from Mike Macdonald. And people just really have a hard time with it. I mean, just so many times you see that guy consistently come free. Like nobody blocks that guy at all. And like you said, it's really a function of how they want to set their protection. They know it's coming when you play the Ravens. You're going to get that pressure. Mm-hmm. And it's just a matter of, okay, well, how do we want to protect that? And it reminds me of, he's the defensive coordinator for the Raiders, Patrick Graham. I was reading an article about him recently, and he talked about sort of his philosophy. And he said, look, typically the quarterback is the main person who's the decision maker, right? The primary decision maker on offense. Other guys have to make decisions, of course, too, but he's kind of the primary guy, right? So there's other guys who make fewer decisions or maybe, not necessarily making any at all on a given play, depending on what's happening. He says, I want to make all those guys decision makers on the level of the quarterback, right? I want to do things where I'm forcing them to make as many decisions as quickly as the quarterback. So I think that's something that you see with Mike Macdonald too, in terms of how he constructs his pressures. I'm going to force everybody to think about this. It's not just the quarterback. I want the offensive line to think about it. I want the backs to think about it. I want the tight ends to think about it. I want everybody to have to think about how they're going to protect. Or if you're not going to, and you're going to let that guy run free, typically you're going to have a hot to that side. There's going to be some hot player that you can throw the ball to the side that he's coming. And they didn't really have any of those players on the times that Mollett got in. So it's pretty interesting to me. And it's almost like that's one of their go-tos in terms of pressure. And it's like to not have a better plan for it than they did was a little surprising.
Yeah, it's definitely something you see a number of times. I was thinking back to something you said in the first episode about there being a tipping point on the number of times you can do things. Like how many times can you rush 5 before the other team adjusts to it and makes it less marginally profitable for you to rush 5? And this is a case where the slot bits. I mean, there'd be you could keep doing it until they prove they could stop it. That'd be one of the solutions here, but they would eventually find a way to stop it.
Right.
One of the things I was thinking is, was there something about the Texans' run game that they wanted to run out of one side or what? I mean, if this is with the Ravens' run game, here's the way I might think about it. If your slot is on the strong side of the field, which it frequently is, you're a tight end there, then you have a slot receiver, and then the outside receiver, of course. And you're running sidecar. You'll often want to run your sidecar with the back left of the quarterback, because your strong side for the running back is going to be over there to run the football. Whether or not that really gives you point of attack advantages is one thing, but also you have Lamar Jackson, and he's going to get free perhaps to the naked side, which is what you want also. So you want your back to be on that side, but that means you're not really protected from pressure in the same way by having the back on your left and the slot corner on your right, because the back's got to come right across the pocket to make that block. And that's a harder stretch for him. He's got to make up more ground. He's got to be decisive about it, because he's got to recognize what's going on right away. And if he had any other assignment to go on a route somewhere, and it actually is a pass play, he's got to figure out, okay, do I give up on this chip block now to make this? And that's the kind of decision making you're probably talking about there. It's something extra that guy has to decide. And you want your other team's bad or green decision makers to make more decisions. Completely agree with that.
Yeah, they talk about particularly on the offensive line. Now, maybe the center, is another guy who sort of processes in a similar way to the quarterback. But some of the other guys, guards and tackles, I've heard defensive coaches talk about in-flight adjustments. Right? Those guys don't want to in-flight adjust. They're not good at it. So let's try to make them do it as much as possible. And it would be interesting now that we make this point. And I'll move on. I wonder if there might have been something formationally. I'd have to go back and look, because I didn't necessarily try to make a mental note of that when I was watching the game, when he came on those off the edge pressures. If it was like a formation thing, because I want to say it was at least two of them were off the left side, were off Tunsil's side. I don't know if they all were off that side or not. I'm just wondering if it might have been a formational thing for them, in terms of Texans being in a certain formation and the Ravens say, okay, well, when they get into this is where we want to send, the nickel. Because I don't know that I wonder if they help as much to Tunsil's side, just in general, because of how good he is, as opposed to, helping in other places. And I wonder if that could have been a part of it. Anyway, I'd have to go back and look. It's just all of this is turning in my head right now as we're talking about it. Sure.
Yeah, and that could well be. Could be empty looks. They're more likely to blitz off the slot. I think it might be less likely when you're empty, because you're already looking for a pretty hot throw when you're empty. Yeah, but anyway, I think it'd be fascinating to go back and try and look at that. And maybe I go back and look. I don't know if I'd be worrying if I'm truncating things to look back at, say, just the sacks, but they're easier to find. Mm-hmm. But if I look at all the times they rushed off slot corner, I do have that at least the times they didn't declare on a pre-snap basis. So I could go back and look at those plays. Now I think that's a worthwhile off-season project.
Yeah, I've slowed down on some of that kind of stuff. As you know, in years past, that was right up my alley. Me and Yoshi would get together and work on all these different kinds of projects. And it's funny how both of us have kind of moved away from doing that stuff as much as we used to, just for different reasons. Nothing negative, nothing bad, but just doing different things in life. And, it was like we had this really good run under the Greg Roman years, and we went like really heavy on it. And then when Giro left, it's like we left too. We're like, all right, man, we're out of here too.
All right. The run. Okay, so you stopped charting the run game this year.
Oh yeah, I didn't chart anything this year.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. It's some of the best stuff you'll ever see. If you want to go back in one of the really good visual pods, it's a video pod that's still out there on the site. Go look for Yoshi's Josh Mastiko and Michael talking about their work on the run game. It is exactly how I tell people to do an analytic study. Be universal about what you're looking at. Put the tool in the hand of the troublemaker. Because there's going to be people who go, well, your study's going to cover this or not cover that. We'll just give them the tool to make all the fine-tuned adjustments they want. And Josh had done a great job with that. And Michael did all the charting, I know, for it. And you guys are a great team. I'll tell you that. I'm sorry to hear you're not working on anything together.
Yeah, well, we had a good 5-year run. We went from 18 to 22. Every run play for all of those seasons. So it was a good run.
That is a good run. That's a good basis for a lot of that stuff. But it's and it's all Roman based, which is kind of cool. So the next team that gets Greg Roman, their people should be after you to explain what are they getting.
It's weird. This is gonna sound like stalkerish, but so he leaves, right? And I think one of the side hustles he picks up was with the 33rd team. I don't know if you're familiar with that website, but he's doing some kind of like very, very limited cameos with them, some videos. So I think he did 1 or 2 this season, right? So I found out that he was working there, and I'm like, I'm gonna cold send him my charty. I'm gonna say, hey man, I dug into your offense super hardcore. It's the run game part of it, super hardcore for like 5 years. Because regardless of what people think about him, and I know the mixed feelings about him, I still wanted to like learn from the dude because I think his run game is one of the most unique run games that's we've probably seen in quite some time. So I just like sent it to him, like just cold email. They're not him, but 33rd team or whatever. And of course, I never heard from him, but I did it like 3 or 4 times. I sent it like 3 or 4 times.
I'm really surprised. I mean, that's kind of not cool for him not to respond to that at all.
Well, I didn't send it directly to him because I didn't have a direct contact to him. So it's probably going into some black hole, email.
Oh, that could be.
Yeah.
I hope that's the case. I hope he didn't like get it and not respond to you, because that's a lot of work. And obviously someone who's put that much effort into, I mean, they should be encouraged at the minimum, and at the maximum, you should be pointed to, as somebody who would be a good person to have in somebody's front office. I mean, at the maximum, it's not good if Roman did not do that for you.
Oh, well, I'm sure. I really don't think it was that, because again, it was something like 33rd team at, like, it's a super generic email address. So I'm sure, who knows if he ever even saw it, whoever's looking at that inbox, if they're even looking at it, is probably just like, just put that over there. But I just thought, with him being out of the league, you don't really get a lot of those opportunities. Like when those guys are working, you're not going to have a way, unless you know somebody who knows somebody, to get in contact with those guys. But when he's there, I'm like, hey, maybe he'd be open to talking about some stuff, because who knows if he's going to get back in it or not. But I'll probably do it again in the offseason. I'll spam him again. We'll see if I get lucky.
Now he knows your email address, or whoever does knows it.
Hey, I used to work in sales. I'm used to getting rejected. It's no big deal.
All right, Michael, who do you want to talk about next?
All right. We talked about this a little bit on the first show, so I'm not sure how I want to go. I did want to talk about Kyle Hamilton, but I got to show Clowney. I got to show Jadeveon Clowney some love. So I'm going to go with Clowney, because, again, one of those unsung kind of games, and I think he's kind of wore this hat a lot throughout this season. I mean, he certainly had games where he's, had sacks and, done kind of his own numbers. But I thought this game was another one of those unsung type games, right? Where you show up in the run game, they try to block you with a tight end, and you just jack that dude 2 yards into the backfield. Like, okay, this is a bad plan. If this is your plan for how you want to block me in the run game, this is a bad plan, right? Or, even if it's taking on a tackle, or a puller, whatever the case may be, just kind of doing some of that dirty work where he's playing the block in a way where he's probably not going to make the tackle, but it's freeing somebody else up to be in position to make the play. And he's done that a lot. I think I may have even mentioned this to you. I think he's really underrated in terms of his football intelligence, particularly in the run game. I don't think people maybe give him, people, obviously coaches and people who've played with him, just certainly they know, but I think just like fans like us, I don't know if people really, I think a lot of the stuff that he does, and we talked about Suggs, I'm not comparing him to Suggs, but some of that mental savviness about, hey, if I shoot this gap and I cross this guy's face and I jam into his shoulder, right? Not only am I going to take him, I'm going to attract the guy adjacent to him, because he's going to feel me. So now I got 2 guys coming over to try to account for me. That gets that guy's eyes off of whoever he's supposed to be blocking, and then they can scrape and flow and make the play. He does that a lot, and I don't know if people pick up on it as much. So that, and then of course, still doing what he does, in terms of a pass rusher. He's going to have some rushes a couple times a game where he's just, making the quarterback uncomfortable and moving off his spot. And he may not get home because he's not, the most bendy guy in the world. So sometimes he doesn't always finish, but he consistently doing something to help his teammates or to help, make a play.
Yeah, he certainly had some of that in this game where the lack of bend showed up in terms of getting pushed by the pocket. And I had some marginal pressures for him in this game, but he starts off the chain reaction. He gets Stroud to even take a half step forward, and then he's leaving the pocket immediately after that. That's really a pressure if he's made that happen. And then of course that becomes this continuation pressure. Like you, I noticed really good plays against the run. The very first play of the game, he took Singletary down for nothing. And when you look at the plays that made the Texans gave up on the run game, that was one. And the second one was one of the really big ones. Q1 322. He shed Schultz, who is a guy who probably it's not a great blocking assignment to give for the offense to put him on Clowney.
We're not thinking prime Nick Boyle when we think of Dalton Schultz.
No. It's not an ideal situation. But he not only did he get off Schultz, he kind of jammed him backwards and then shed him. It was an oddball kind of a look to it where he just hit him too hard off the line of scrimmage. Schultz kind of just reacted badly, stepped backwards, and stood up. Kind of the worst thing you can do as an offensive lineman, right? Stand right up against the defender. And he not only did he get in on Singletary, the tackle was one of the most vicious I've ever seen. He literally slammed him down like a pro wrestler, not like actual wrestling. I think in high school works, but it was just a violent slam down. And I could see how they didn't really think they could run the ball after that.
Yeah, he is a super violent guy. I mean, that is the way he plays the game. That's the way he approaches it. And he's even talked about sometimes that over the course of his career, probably to his detriment, because he said, there's probably something else I'm supposed to be doing, but I just want to run through somebody's face. So he's acknowledged that I've probably missed some sacks. I've probably missed some assignments and some other things because I should be doing one thing, but I want this guy across from me to understand that I'm out here to destroy him. And I want that in his head every snap that I line up across from him.
We've certainly been talking about this all season, but the Ravens, league leading pass rush number was made up primarily of complementary pressures. And this is why full sacks are kind of a garbage stat. You really need to be assigning out credit for sacks in a fractional nature, in my opinion, because that's how if I'm not just talking about halves and fulls, I'm talking about usually there's initial pressure that moves the guy, and there's other people who come and show up and finish the job. And it is a compound game. And it's the nature of this for the Ravens has never been more apparent than it was here with the swarms getting to the quarterback. We've probably had more missed sacks this year than any time previously in Ravens history. But that doesn't mean they missed a sack in the end. It means the first guy missed a sack. Yep. And those often ended up being sacks by some other player. Clowney missed two, a couple of games ago that Urban picked up both of them. We've had plenty of others this whole season that fell into exactly this category. And I think about Ed Reed, the player, and Ed Reed got to a lot of balls, but to say that Ed Reed caught every ball that was in his breadbasket would be a complete misstatement. He dropped plenty. He just had a lot of at bats on those balls because you got
shots on goal. That's what Wink used to talk about. Shots on goal. Right? There you
go. All right, we got time for a couple more players here. I really want to get to this mailbag because it looks good and it looks very detailed.
All right, another player. Let's do Hamilton. I was going to do him before. Let's do him now. Maybe not a ton of production numbers, right? We're not sacks or PBUs or a ton of stuff like that. But he's another one of those guys that certainly has that. He certainly, you can go back and look at his games over the course of this season. He's definitely had games where he's put up numbers, but he's another one of those players that takes things away, right? You have a plan. There's something you want to do. There's certain concepts you want to get to, certain plays you want to get to. But because of who he is and the way that he plays and his football intelligence, how smart he is and how quickly he diagnoses things, he takes them away. And it's almost like if you're a play caller, you're looking at your sheet and you're like, I can't run that. I can't run that. You might try it one or two times. He blows it up and you're like, I can't call that anymore. And this was something that I felt really good about going into the game. He's taking it away. If I want to be a perimeter screen team, because we saw them, have some success with that against the Browns, some stuff to Nico Collins, some stuff out there to Devin Singletary, they'll kind of flare him out. You can't do it. You can't do it when Kyle Hamilton is out there. And that, in addition to just counting stats and the stuff that he certainly accumulates, there are things like that are just really hard to measure because it's forcing the offense to be left-handed in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's left-handed is a good way to put it because the right hand is usually a strong side of the field, and Hamilton is better at taking that away from the edge player to the sideline. He is the most impactful player in the National Football League right now in terms of horizontal defense.
Yeah, no question about it. He just erases it, and it's got to be super frustrating as an offensive play caller, because you got this stuff that you like, you've worked on it all week, you've done it in other games, and you're like, man, we just cannot get this off against this guy.
Okay, let's go to the mailbag if we can. We'll get some questions done. Got a great set here, obviously. By the way, questions, not only have they been more numerous recently, they've been of higher quality. And I really want to apologize to people where we haven't gotten to your question, but really appreciate all the efforts in putting these in and the time it takes to think of these. Just some really thought-provoking stuff has come up. But I'll go through a few of these. We got one of the great guys to start with the first answer here. We'll get this is from Logan Frazier. He says, is this the best Ravens defensive performance where we had no sacks or takeaways? I imagine it would be hard to replicate the low points and yards allowed without getting at least one of either.
Well, you're certainly going to be able to verify it with numbers. I can't do that, but it certainly feels like it's got to be top 3 to 5, if not number 1. I mean, it's got to be up there, because we talked about it in part 1. Even without a sack, even without a turnover, the Texans didn't sniff the red zone, right? They didn't make a trip to the red zone. And, that game, aside from maybe the first half, right, where the Ravens offense was a little bit slower to get started, but in the second half, even in the first half, if we're just talking about the defense, but particularly even in the second half, once the offense got going, it just never felt like they were a threat, to score offensively. Yeah, they hit a play or two here or there, but you never really felt like, okay, this is, an offense who's going to be able to go up and down the field on the Ravens. It just never felt that way. And to me, that's kind of how I measure those things. I'm like, does the offense feel like they can threaten you in this game? And if I don't feel that when I'm watching it, then I'm like, okay, I don't know what the numbers say, but I don't see them as a threat. And that's how I felt.
Well, the first thing is this almost never happens. I mean, almost never. I'm looking at the 2023 Ravens had a sack in every single game. How about the 2000 Ravens? Because they didn't have a lot of sacks for the whole year. They were in the 30s, I believe. They only had 2 0-sack games. And in those games, 3 interceptions in one interception in the other. They probably had some fumbles and in those as well. But they didn't have any games where they, basically didn't have any of either. And the 2023 Ravens, this is their first. So it's not a very large denominator. So I would agree with you. It's got to be in the top couple, I would think. And given how dominant this performance was, I have a hard time believing it wasn't number 1, given they only gave up 3 defensive points and 0 red zone opportunities.
Yeah, I talked about how much I like the run game. I equate things to that for whatever reason. I'm always making like run game analogies. It's like having a game where you run for like 200 yards, but you don't have a run longer than like 4 yards. You know what I mean? There's no long runs, there's no home runs in there, but you were just consistently effective over the course of the whole game. And that's really what their defense was.
All right, here's a good one from Eric Zikafus, who says, how do you handle a potential Marlon Humphrey return next week with the way Ronald Darby is playing? I feel Darby has earned the right to snaps going forward.
Well, no disrespect to Darby, because he has played well. And we talked in part 1 about secondary guys and how other guys have stepped in and have not missed a beat. But if Marlon Humphrey is healthy, I'm starting Marlon Humphrey. No disrespect to Ronald Darby. When Marlon's right, Marlon is still, a very good corner in this league.
Now you have multiple choices on where you can put Humphrey, and presumably he's no way in hell is he replacing Stevens, who's really the Ravens' number 1 corner now, maybe even if Marlon is healthy at this point. Then you've got the possibility you could put him in the slot and have him replace Mollett. You could still rotate, which, by the way, was not the case when Marlon was back. Marlon did rotate, I believe, for 1 game, and then he took over 100% of the snaps basically until other injuries set in. But do you stick him back at left cornerback and forget about him at this point, or do you play him some in the slot?
I mean, I guess it would depend on the matchup. No spoilers. I promise you no spoilers. It would depend on the matchup, right? In terms of maybe how much I would want to do that. I don't know. And I like I said, I'm trying to be a little bit delicate with this, because this is not to be disrespectful towards Ronald Darby or like to imply that he's not played well at all. But I guess I just look at it like, yeah, he's played well, but if I've got Marlon Humphrey, I'm playing Marlon Humphrey. I mean, I want him out there. If he's healthy enough to play every snap, I want him playing every snap. Now, you make a good point about where you can line him up, but yeah, okay, maybe if we go like standard nickel, maybe I'll have him in there instead of Marlette or that. But if you can make that argument for Darby, you can maybe make it for Marlette at nickel. So I'm thinking, no, I just want my best players out there.
Darby is fifth in the entire league in yards per target against. So that's the thing. And it's the guys who are ahead of him are Sauce Gardner and not Stingley, because Stingley's not been that good.
He's played way fewer snaps than those guys, though.
He has, but the guys with 300 or more coverage snaps is this. So it's not a minimal standard. Jalen Johnson leads the entire NFL at 3.9. I had the list. I put it out the other day, but Darby being fifth was really remarkable, I thought.
Would you consider, let me turn the question around. Would you consider still giving Darby, a role or a larger role, even when Marlon's healthy?
I would allow it. I would try and determine if Marlon could be Marlon over the course of an entire game. And if I didn't think it was possible, then I'd rotate him.
Okay. That's fair.
Yeah. I'd be amenable to either potentially. I think Marlette has, both of them have like, they're almost too good to sit at this point. But you got to sit somebody, you probably end up sitting either Mollett or Darby. And they obviously, the guy who they just clearly has fallen to the bottom of their depth chart, other than JAD, who went on injured reserve, obviously is Yassine.
Yassine, yeah.
Yeah.
How ironic would it be if Marlon gets the Jimmy Smith treatment? When he was the guy who did that to Jimmy Smith. Now he was a younger player, so different set of circumstances. But if just for health reasons, like you said, hey, he's not quite 100% yet. We want to get him out there, but he's not maybe ready to go the full way. So we kind of platoon him a little bit.
Yeah, he's such a physical presence. Yeah. I mean, if getting him back at left corner with Hamilton playing on the slot most of the time on that side, that is an unbelievable pairing. It's kind of the Darby Hamilton pairing is good because they have, kind of a little different levels of physicality. Darby, pretty good downhill player. Don't get me wrong. I mean, part of his good yards per target number is that he's a good downhill tackler, gets to the guy quickly and takes him down. But it's nothing like having Marlon Humphrey imposing his will on the guy opposite him at the line of scrimmage and have Hamilton doing whatever the hell he wants with a block on that side of the field. I mean, that would take away just about anything you could do on that side of the field.
Yeah, it's a good problem. That's one of those good problems to have.
Yeah. And it's also a position where you often need that next guy anyway. So, So good to have. All right, let's go to another question here because these are some great ones. Next one is from AngeLove85, a regular contributor, by the way. How does our opponent next week, Kansas City or Buffalo? Good. Thanks for not giving that away, AngeLove, because I still don't know. Match up with our defense. Why don't we leave that, because I think we're going to get to that during the week on some matchup shows and some other know your foe shows, I should say. So we'll go ahead. I'm not going to go to the who would we rather have, Kansas City or Buffalo either, but we do appreciate the questions. Okay, here's a good one from First Down Ravens. At First Down Ravens says, my question is about your thoughts on the transition from ace coordinator to head coach. No way could Monken or McDonald have as prolific offense or defense when attending to all of the head coach stuff. ? I think he's saying, is that possible even? Maybe they should stay focused. This is someone who's obviously has a vested interest in this. Complete more years, not stretch. There's a lot of memes out there right now. They're not memes exactly.
The jokes.
Go ahead, talk about them.
Yeah, there's been apparently Mike McDonald is an awful human being because he's kicked puppies and done all kinds of terrible things, and that's why you should never hire him as your head coach. So obviously, I'm joking for anybody who's not seeing any of that stuff, but there's been whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on Reddit, probably on some Ravens board somewhere too, who knows? People have started making all of these jokes, and there's a way. Obviously, we know it's not going to be taken seriously, but just people having fun with it because they don't want to see him leave. And so, you're trying to paint this picture of him being a bad human being so that he won't be hired by anybody else. But yeah, look, I get it. No, when you've got a guy, what's he, 36 years old? When you've got a young guy like that who's come in and had the success that he's had. I know Monken's in a different place in terms of age, but you don't want to see those guys leave. I understand. I totally get it. because you got a good thing going here. You don't want to blow it up. You want to see it continue. I've leaned, I know I'm probably going further into the question of what he actually asked because he might have just been joking, really. I'm not sure that Monken is going to go anywhere.
Right.
Now, look, if you truly get offered a head coaching job, there's only 32 of them. I get it. But he's been a head coach, not on a professional level, but in college. And just anytime he's talked about it, the way he talks about it, and maybe it's just talk, maybe behind the scenes he feels differently and like he really would jump at it. But when he's talked about it publicly, it's kind of like, yeah, I've done that. I get, the allure, but sometimes it's not all it's cracked up to be. Mm-hmm. I think he sort of has a good perspective on it. Coming from a coaching family, just like Harbaugh, I think he's got like 5 people in his family who coach. His dad was a coach. So I think he's seen all the sides of it. And so I don't know that he's like, I got to do it. McDonald being young, I think it's just different, when you're younger, because it's kind of like, hey, if I can get there, I didn't expect to get there this soon, but if I can get there at this age, I kind of have to do it. I kind of have to try it, and see, because those opportunities are rare. So I don't know, man. It's a tough question.
Isn't he, to me, he's a little bit too old for a really progressive organization that wants to have a long-term plan. I mean, he's not the kind of coach you go with. You go with,
you mean for Monken?
Yeah, for Monken. Yeah, I think you go for the 36-year-old guy, you go with a 40-year-old guy, and you try and build a dynasty out of that. Absolutely. I understand that, but not a 56 or 58 or whatever he is. He's honestly too old to get a long-term first head coaching gig. He could be the guy that someone brings in to get their quarterback's career off the ground. So, Justin Herbert in San Diego would be the job for Monken if it were to happen.
Yeah.
And I'd take it if I were him.
Yeah, he could. I've joked about this when, his name started to get mentioned for these opportunities. I'm like, he could be, what's that show? Bar Rescue, right? Where the guy goes into like these failing bars and he tries to turn them around and, make them successful. He quarterback rescue, right? When Monken comes in for a year and he rescues your quarterback, and then he goes into the next situation.
Okay, so that's some sort of a show like Pawn Stars or something like this. That's
this guy, he's like a real personality, and he comes in and he's like yelling at people and fussing at people and like exposing, all the bad practices and the bad things that they're doing, why their bar is a failure. But then he helps them turn it around, in a variety of ways. They do a bunch of different things. He's got other experts he brings in to say, hey, this guy can help you in the kitchen, put together your menus. Other guy can help you with marketing, all of that. So Monken quarterback rescue season 1. Hopefully we never get to see it. Hopefully it stays here.
I'm now of the belief we've passed the point where it's more likely they keep all 3 than lose 1. Which I thought it was about a 50-50 chance at the beginning, meaning I had a 45, 9 and 1 of losing 0, 1, 2, or 3. Okay. Now I'd say it's more like 60% they keep them all.
Just because of timing.
Yeah. Timing, the fact that some of the jobs have already been taken. People kind of got on me a little bit for saying that Belichick was basically could be taking another spot away. But the Patriots immediately hired an internal candidate who I don't believe was on anybody else's head coaching radar, in Jared Mayo.
Yeah.
And so that's a first of all, I think it's probably a good hire for the Pats because they know who they have in-house there. But second of all, there's always the possibility of an in-house candidate. So you've got that when you have a coach. And Belichick almost certainly is going to have either that Atlanta job or one of the others. Possibly takes a year off and waits to come back for an even better gig. Surveying the situation, but I think he'll be back in football at some point.
Yeah, the joke for me has been, was he 15 wins away or so from the all-time wins record for a coach? And he's been connected to the Falcons, right? Second interview, I'm like, well, what better division to go in and get you 15 wins in a season or two, Yeah,
no, that should be good. Okay, Doug, DW Drummer 99 says, have you officially recanted your statement about it being not all that cold yet? Yeah, it was cold. My feet were cold by the end of the game. I still recommend, by the way, I don't know if you've ever tried this, but if you go to a real cold weather game, 1/8 inch insulation plastic, cut it into 20 by 16 squares roughly, put it on your seat. And by the way, I pulled mine up at the 2-minute warning and sat down on the seat again thereafter. Absolute complete difference in heat exchange between my butt and that seat. It was cold. I was sitting on a rock hard cold thing. The whole game I'd been sitting in basically my own recycled body heat that in a way that was much more comfortable. So my feet were cold by the end of the game. But yeah, it was not that terrible. We've seen worse. All right, toss another one here. This is from Alvindo Royale, who says, have you ever seen a defense be so dominant without recording a sack or turnover? What's the secret sauce? Matchup zone. So we kind of went on this before. Talk a little bit about matchup zone and what you saw from the Ravens maybe in this game, if anything, that was really different from what they've done during the season, or had they been pretty much multiple in terms of the way they rotated out of those starting two high looks?
Yeah, I don't know that there was any. Now, I'll caveat this with I haven't seen the coach's film yet, so some of the angles are better there because you can see, the whole field and the safety play and the corner play. You don't always get that in the broadcast unless you get a replay. So there's your disclaimer. I don't think, just from what I saw rewatching the TV copy, that it was anything, very different from what they've done throughout the season. The matchup zone, I always like to think about it in terms of basketball. And this is probably going to age me because people will be like, who is this? Younger listeners. Mm-hmm. But I think about Jim Boeheim at Syracuse.
Oh,
right?
Sure.
Known for the matchup zone, right? That was their go-to defense. That is what they were known for playing. And not that other teams didn't play it, but that's kind of their bread and butter, right? And it's very similar, at least in my mind, to the way that the Ravens play their coverages, where it's zone, but it also has man principles built into it, right? That's the match, right? That's the matchup part of it, hence the name. So it really is sort of dictated by spacing on the field and the kind of space that you want to constrict. I had this conversation with Caleb Wharton. You may remember Caleb, a number of years ago. And he put me on this path of thinking about football in terms of a game of territory, right? Who you want to gain territory if you're on offense, you want to defend territory if you're on defense. You want to constrict space on defense, you want more space on offense. So you're thinking about it that way. So the matchup zone is sort of similar, right? Where obviously you can't stop everything that an offense does, but you want to point them to the strengths of your coverage and, sort of away from the weaknesses of your coverage. So you can do that with pressure to sort of force the ball to come out and go to certain areas, right, where you anticipate it going and you can rally up and make tackles, or maybe even have somebody coming down to break on a ball or whatever. So it's just very multiple. It's very flexible. And I think this is why I know weren't necessarily answering that question for earlier about, how they match up about, whoever their future opponent is. It sort of doesn't matter in some way. I mean, it matters because, of course, you're going to plan for whatever that team specifically does. But because of how multiple they are, because of how flexible their principles are, it almost doesn't matter because you can handle whatever, X team does. You've got those answers built into your structure, and it becomes more about what you do than what they do. Yeah. And that's when I think you're really on to something that is really sound and not like gimmicky.
If you flip that over to the offensive side of the ball, and with your love of the run game, this makes a great run game analogy here, is the Ravens during the Roman era, it didn't matter how good the opposing run defense was because the things that you had to do to stop Lamar Jackson from being effective and stop the other are completely different from standard run game principles. And that's why the Ravens ran very well, even on teams that were theoretically were very good run stopping teams. And the Texans, they're theoretically a very good run stopping team, second in the entire NFL in terms of DVOA. Did they stop the Ravens run yesterday?
They did not. They did not. That's a very good point. Yeah, you did have to, and I think that's something that is sort of maybe we don't think about it as you probably do, but I mean overall, this is something I've thought about over the years. Because of the way that they were defended under Roman, maybe to a lesser extent with Monken, because there's a little bit more balance in terms of passing concepts and volume of drop back passes. But you almost feel like Lamar has to process more in some ways than the quote unquote average QB.
Sure.
Because he's seen so many more variations in defense and approaches to defending him. That's just in the run game, let alone what you're getting in the passing game. So I'm like, there's almost maybe more that he has to process then you're kind of, whether you put him in one of those other two buckets, your typical prototypical drop back passer or your super athletic, run heavy quarterback, whichever one of those two buckets he almost has to do all of that. And I've always thought about that when people, talk about, well, he doesn't do this well, he doesn't do that well. I was like, he might do more than a lot of these other guys that you're comparing him to.
I'm not even going to try and bucket the guy. He's in the Lamar Jackson bucket because he's so unique.
Oh, I don't. Yeah, you can't. You can't count.
But okay. I'll start with the fact that if you're really talking about what Lamar has to process for the run game, I literally think he's been doing that since he's 7 or 8 years old, going out and playing tag in the backyard. It's reading leverage on your opponent, and he probably could 1-2 his next door neighbor 3 times as better as he can 1-2 a defensive back today, because those guys are athletes that are trying to really stop him, but still awfully darn well, even at that age. And you hear him talk about leverage. He's at a different theoretical level in terms of understanding what move is coming next. So, and the passing game, it's something that has evolved obviously during his career in terms of picking things up. He had a great career at Louisville. In a lot of ways, he had to start over again at the NFL level. And I don't mean anything bad at all about that, but it's just there were new things he had to learn, and he's become more effective. And ain't it been great being here for all of it?
It has been amazing. It's been better than anything we could have ever imagined.
It really is. It really has just been unbelievable. We stopped our first round coverage of the draft that night a little bit early because the Ravens had picked, and there was 3 picks left in the first round or something, and I head up to bed and not expecting anything more to happen. Then all of a sudden I see this post that says, "Ozzie, you sexy bastard." And it was him trading up for number 32 to get Lamar Jackson. And that was unbelievably cool. I'll tell you that. This fits well into our last question of the night, which comes from Luke. Luke, this is Luke Ball is his last name. He is the crowd noise guru.
Okay.
Came on the show to this in, and he says, only one question this week: who's got it better than us?
Nobody. Everybody knows the answer to that.
That is the right answer. That is the right answer. All right, my friend, let's go back and talk defensive MVPs from this game. Need a 3-2-1 list from you. We'll start off with your number 3 guy.
All right, I'm probably going to keep it somewhat similar to the order, and we talked about some of these players. I'm going to go Justin Madubuike. No, he's 3. He's right, 3-2-1. I'm sorry. I'm going to go Clowney. Clowney's going to be 3 for me.
Clowney is my number 3 guy as well. We talked about him enough, I think, on this show. Outstanding game. Continues to make contributions play after play. You don't always know the way the contributions are going to come from Clowney. You mentioned this earlier, that he does some very savvy things on a football field that are different and potentially unexpected in a defense that's so concerned with denying space and creating opportunity for those around you. I think he's been a great fit.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Number 2.
Also my number 3 guys. Just your number 2 guy. Yep.
Number 2. I'm going to go chalk. I'll go Millette. Arthur Millette. We'll run the chalk.
All right. Well, Arthur Millette it is.
Run the chalk.
My number 2 guy. And a great game for Millette. 3 drive ending plays that he participated in. That's always a big thing for me. Is what do they do? But he only played 18 snaps in this game. Contributions to 2 drive ending plays. And he had 6-7 highlights as I've got him. Didn't have any lowlights among his plays as we had notes. He was either cleaning up after somebody else's tackle. In one case, was about the least of his highlights. You want your highlights to be highlighty.
Mm-hmm. Very highlighty.
Yeah, that was good stuff. But Arthur Millette also my number 2 guy. Who's your number 1?
Just Madubuike. Yeah, I gave it away.
Yeah, great game from Madubuike. I think we talked about him enough on this episode to know just the multiple contributions he's made. I guess I'll ask a question related to Madubuike just to close out the show here. One of the possibilities, the Ravens obviously are going to have to be very careful with all the dollars they spend next year, and they've got a lot of players, a lot of mouths to feed. Particularly if this team goes all the way, there's going to be a lot of extra demand probably on the market for those players. About 43% of the snaps earlier in the year were already headed out the door. Michael Pierce got re-signed, so that reduced that number slightly. But still a huge great migration of free agents out of Baltimore this year is coming. if you have two choices, one of them is you can sign Madubuike to a long-term deal, but it basically takes about every available dollar you have. It leaves you with no flexibility in terms of signing free agents you'd need at other positions. Or the other option is you tag and trade him, and maybe with that acquire the additional draft capital you need for your left tackle of the future. Which would you prefer to do?
This is going to be cheating a little bit because Denard and I have talked about this a couple times this year with Madubuike. Yeah. We're both on the same page with this. I'd tag and trade.
Okay. And unfortunately, I'm the same player. I never like to see a player like this walk out the door, but I'm basically in the same spot. And honestly, the Ravens will never get a great left tackle at the end of the first round, and they need to replace 2 tackles in 2 years. And one of those guys certifiably has to be okay on the left side. None of this maybe stuff. You can't have, I think this guard tackle might work out and he could play on the left side for us.
Yeah. Can't do that. Yeah, it's hard. I remember the first time Denard and I talked about it, and we just came to it separately. We had not said anything to each other about it. And I was like, I don't know that I can give him a top of the market deal. And he's like, no, I wouldn't do it either. So we both just kind of came to it. And it's nothing against the player. That's the crazy thing, because people will hear it, and let's say they don't do it, and he goes somewhere else and he has another great year or whatever, goes on to have like a great career, right? It's all ascending. It's like, as good as this was, it just goes up from here on out. And people are like, you were an idiot. Clearly you guys were wrong. You let this guy go. But I'm just like, this team, and we talked about it throughout this episode and part 1, the way that they've built this team, the way that they've constructed this roster, right? This is why they're so good. Because of the depth, because of the different skill sets, the complementary skill sets. And you can't do that. Well, I shouldn't say can't. It's harder to do that when you have dollars tied up and committed with, a very small, number of players, and you've kind of hamstrung yourself in terms of your ability to build this sort of holistic roster. So I was maybe a little bit different side of that before this year. Not totally. I mean, I kind of always been on this side, but more on the fence. And now this year I'm like, no, if I have an opportunity to repeat this sort of roster build, not necessarily player for player, but just like philosophically what I'm trying to do, I want to do this every time. This is the way that I want to do this
every time you have a really good chance.
Yeah. If
you can't do it every time.
right. If I'm in the bottom and I'm, got to claw my way back up because we're like, we've bottomed out, that's different. But if I feel like I've got a chance, yeah.
So you're in this position. I would look at this as you're borrowing, and I don't know what the amount would be this year, but it's probably $20 million from future cap years of some sort. Mm-hmm. You borrowed, so you essentially spent 108% of your cap this year. No, yeah, it's about 108% of your cap this year. Of the dollars you had. You have to make up for that at some future point, either by not having a quarterback and doing what Tampa Bay did this year, and you have Baker Mayfield play for you for a year. Maybe he takes you to the playoffs. Sure. But you got to go cheap, or you got to go through other painful cuts. I look at it. As a season ticket holder, I want levelized play, and I want them to go out and field a competitive team every year. I think they overdid it this year a little bit. I'm okay with it because they really have been a Super Bowl contender, but I couldn't see them doing this 3 years in a row because I think it would create a really big problem for them, which is why I want some austerity next year in this regard. And it will be still a team where the Ravens have a chance because they've got Lamar Jackson and they've got the basic building pieces on defense with Hamilton and Roquan. But I don't think it's close enough to being a great team. It's kind of like the same situation they're in 2001 that they can say, yeah, we'll do it again.
Because what were the big expenditures on defense? I know Odell was an overpay. Odell was the big overpay. Yeah, and they've even acknowledged that they probably did. But there's other. That'd be interesting. I don't think I've asked you how you felt about this. There's other sort of residual value, I think, by bringing a guy like him in, even if you got to overpay him. Because think about where they were and how they were perceived in terms of wide receivers and what kind of destination this was for wide receivers. Now, it's totally different offense.
Sell me on it. But what I'm going to ask you to do is give me a dollar value for each of these elements you're going to talk about in terms of what value is it as a percentage of cap? Because I could otherwise spend that dollar on somebody else and get him to come there by buying him. And
possibly.
It's
possibly.
It's not. Well, I mean, there's some dollar amount I could do it for, certainly.
That's true.
To even the top of the market guys. I think I cannot get to that position, and I think that a lot of this was done for Lamar Jackson. If you want to sell it on that basis, I don't really have an answer for it. If you want to say that Odell Beckham has been worth some lesser amount, I agree. If you want to say he was worth $6.5 million, $7 million, $8 million, even maybe this year, based on what he's, his play on the field, his leadership, the fact that other people are buying into things, the fact that he's this anti-hero at camp, where basically, and that's really kind of the wrong word for it, but the fact that all the kids are going crazy for him, and it takes the attention and the pressure off some other players, probably because of that. I think a lot of that is good. The anti-hero stuff also during the regular season, where he's drawing penalties. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. From Odell. So that's a real positive. But on the, and there's probably other things he's teaching other players to do. So if I can put the package of things together, I can get to 8 or 9 million on this year, maybe that he's worth. And if you wanted to pay something like that again, although I think you got to portend that you'd have to portend that more decline was on the way.
Sure.
With him, maybe he's worth $6.5 million next year. I think he probably tries to get more than that somewhere else, but we'll see. Is it really good that they got that contract restructured, by the way? It shows you that they did really get creative about moving those dollars, kicking those dollars down the road.
Yeah. I would. You felt like they had to. Like when you saw the original deal, you're like, okay, this has got to happen at some point. And the way that they've structured it now, it's like, okay, yeah, they've the next move, right, is certainly going to happen, because I forget what the trigger is that, they'd be on the hook.
$50 million.
Some crazy some ridiculous number. So they'll definitely make something, right? Some sort of decision will happen. So, okay, it's just interesting. I've talked about that with a couple different people, and, there's the tangible part of it, and then there's the intangible part. And that part is always hard. Like, what's the real value of this intangible stuff, right? It's hard to do it. So, but me, I'm a touchy-feely kind of person, so I like that stuff.
You're a good man, and you're one of my favorite guests ever, of course, on the show, Michael. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
On Twitter at Abukari, Abukari. Do a podcast called Deep Cover with Chris Aguilera and Kerry Stevenson. Find that anywhere you get your podcast. Also do another one. Deep Cover is kind of just universal. We talk Ravens, but we talk a bunch of other stuff too. Offense, defense, all of that. Fire Zone show that I do with Denard Melton. Strictly defense. Every now and then we might dip our toe in offensive water, but it's almost all defense. So that's a fun one too. It's near and dear to both of our hearts. He loves defense because, like you said, he played linebacker at JMU, and he coached some high school ball for a while. And I love the run game, and I was very bad at defense when I played a long time ago. So we share that.
Give those two pods, give them each a chance. They don't self-promote the way some other pods do. And they're maybe not as translatable from a YouTube algorithm or whatever it might be. I honestly don't know. I don't know anything about your listens, but I will say that whatever your listens are, you deserve more. And so give some of those pods that don't always come up, don't always get mentioned as being one of the great pods. This is one of the ones I'd recommend. There are other ones too on YouTube and whatnot. Coach has a good Sip to Tally.
Coach Evans, right,
great stuff. Has good, and Coach Derek. I'm trying to remember the all 22
cuts.
Yep. He's got really good content that's worth it, and he's doing some universal type looks at things, which is very good. With Coach Evans, you get just tremendous amount of wisdom in terms of coaching that I think is very positive. Always like talking football with him. And I haven't seen Edgar Allan Poe's stuff in a while, but it's a music teacher who does stuff, and he's been on this show before. I'm trying to remember what his last name is, but I can't offhand. Maybe he doesn't tell anybody.
I did not know he was a music teacher. I did not know.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's really like a golden age for Ravens fan created content, like we're not, with the team or anything like that. And there's just so much out there. So there's something for everybody, whatever like area or topical area that, you're interested in. There's no shortage, right? It can be whatever. It is out there for you. So I always love being on with you because, we both kind of like to get kind of super nerdy with this stuff. That's just the way that we approach it. We like to talk about it on that level. And honestly, there's not a ton of people I can do that with. There's some for sure, but there's not a ton that I can do it. So I always enjoy that.
Oh, really appreciate having you on, of course, Michael. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. I'm interested in your content, not just for the rest of this season, which if you got something to talk about the Super Bowl, let's get that on the table quickly so we can get that recorded, because we got a week off additionally, potentially there, if the Ravens can get through the AFC Championship. And also your off-season content. If you want to do 4 episodes on the evolution of something in football, this is a great time to have that sort of discussion. I'll be going through a lot of content to review this great Ravens season. So we'll have a lot of those shows. If you want to be on one, if you have interest in contributing to something like that, just give me a DM on that and I'll put you on a schedule to be in something that then we'll have tons of draft content, et cetera, all the usual stuff. I'm sure Michael will be on some of that because he really loves the draft. And hopefully we'll have a chance to do much more during the content this off season, Michael.
Okay. I look forward to it.
Really appreciate having you on again, and we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.